Welcome. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Episcopal Parish Network, and we are so pleased to have you joining us today with this group to discuss welcoming the stranger and the ministries of Episcopal Migration Ministries and the Church as a whole on welcoming refugees and other displaced persons. So I am very pleased to have this panel join us. Several of them were in our last panel on this subject at the end of last year. It's terrific to have them back. We're pleased that you're able to join us as attendees. If you have questions or comments, we would ask you to place them in the chat box. Please use the chat box for any questions or comments. And I would invite you now, just so that our panel can get to know you, to add your name and where you're dialing in from so that they can get a sense of who from the church might be attending today. So please put that into the chat box. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Canon Chuck Robertson to do some further introductions and add some comments. Again, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Joe. It is a pleasure to do this today, and we have an incredible conversation ahead for all of you. I'm Chuck Robertson. I'm the canon to the presiding bishop for ministry beyond the Episcopal Church, and certainly the work with refugees, with asylum seekers, with immigrants, with the stranger. This is such a vital part of the work of love in Jesus' name, and a vital part of the ministry of Episcopal Migration Ministries. Before we get started with our conversation, let us make sure that we recognize the one who calls all of us together for these conversations and for the work we're called to do. So let us pray. This prayer is specifically from the Church of England and their work with refugees. Almighty and merciful God, whose Son became a refugee and had no place to call his own, look with mercy on those who today are fleeing from danger, homeless and hungry. Bless those who work to bring them relief. Inspire generosity and compassion in all our hearts, and guide the nations of the world towards that day when all will rejoice in your kingdom of justice and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, welcome to this conversation. Hope that you will not only be inspired by it, but also take this with you as you move forward. And so I now turn to my esteemed colleague from the Church Engagement Unit of Episcopal Migration Ministries, Kendall Martin. Kendall?
Thank you, Canon Chuck, and thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to moderate this discussion with our panelists, which include Allison Duvall. She's the Senior Manager for Church Relations and Engagement for Episcopal Migration Ministries. Mary Kent Hill, a parishioner at Chapel of the Cross in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Jane Prescott Smith of St. Philip's Refugee Welcome Team at St. Philip's in the Hills, Tucson, Arizona. And Brad Johns of St. Philip's Refugee Welcome Team at St. Philip's in the Hills, Tucson, Arizona. So several months ago, when we gathered for a panel discussion about migration ministries, we were discussing the situation with Afghan arrivals and how resettlement agencies, faith groups, community groups were coming together and responding. And so today I'd like to frame our conversation within the context of the current situation with Afghan arrivals, as well as the situation in Ukraine and the government's newest program, Uniting for Ukraine. So I'd love to ask my colleague Allison if you can give us a brief update on the current situation and how the government and the national agencies and community groups are responding.
Thanks, Kendall. And it's so good to be back with Episcopal Parish Network and to see Jane and Mary Kent again and to meet you, Brad and Jackie. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So to answer the question, what I thought I would do is set some context that's a bit of a repetition of what we talked about in December, but also brings us up to the current moment. So the international context in which migration ministry is happening, in which refugee resettlement in the US is happening, is that we continue to live in an era of massive forced displacement. And that was true prior to the fall of Afghanistan. That was true prior to Russia's aggression into Ukraine. And then those were added on to the existing context. So in the United States context, in response to these massive flows of displaced people, there have been new programs set up to help our country respond and to welcome our new neighbors so that they can be set up for success. So I know Jane, Mary Kent, Brad, they'll be speaking about their own congregation's involvement in welcoming Afghan newcomers. But I wanted to also speak about new kind of sea changes and shifts in the larger US resettlement program that are ongoing and will impact how things look in the months to come. So with the Afghan evacuations, new programs and pathways were created for Afghans who did not yet have refugee status abroad, but who were being evacuated by the US military to come to the United States. So many thousands of Afghans were resettled through the existing national resettlement agencies like Episcopal Migration Ministries and our local affiliate partners. And many others were resettled through a new program called the Sponsor Circle Program for Afghans, which was an emergency response to the vast number of individuals who needed welcome and the lack of capacity that the national agencies and local affiliates had to welcome those numbers. The context that preceded that was that the last presidential administration had a very different approach to refugee resettlement and cut in half the number of local affiliate offices across the country who could do this work. So we as a sector are rebuilding under the Biden administration. The Biden administration is committed to resettling many more refugees than the last administration, but we had the Afghanistan situation in the midst of needing to rebuild lost capacity. So Sponsor Circle program was that one of those emergency responses to help Americans welcome our Afghan allies when the agencies didn't have the capacity to do so. EMM functions in both the resettlement agency stream. Locally in Arizona, for example, Lutheran Social Services of the Southwest is our local affiliate with whom Jane and Brad and Jackie and their congregation have worked. We also work in the Sponsor Circle program for Afghans. We have housed our Sponsor Circle program for Afghans functions within our existing Neighbor to Neighbor program, which I'll speak about more later. Enter Ukraine. We have many thousands of Ukrainians, many millions who've been forced to flee their homes. Many have ended up in Eastern Europe and are finding safe harbor there for a time. The Biden administration is also committed to welcoming up to 100,000 Ukrainians through a new program called Uniting for Ukraine, which is very different from resettlement, and it's very different from the Sponsor Circle model. But we as EMM are engaging with our partners and with the federal government to understand the ways in which we can engage in welcoming our Ukrainian neighbors through that new pathway. So we might have time to speak about that later. The third piece of context setting that I'd like to end with before hearing from the other panelists is to say that in the midst of all of this sea change and these massive flows of people, there's been an incredible outpouring of support from local community groups, local congregations, volunteers who want to welcome their new neighbors. So in the midst of rebuilding capacity within the formal resettlement program, there's also been these new opportunities for community groups to participate directly in the welcome of their new neighbors, be they refugees, be they coming on humanitarian parole, or be they asylum seekers. And EMM is part of those new opportunities as well, especially through our Neighbor to Neighbor program. So it's a time of great change. It's a time of great adaptation. It's a time of evolution. I feel like every day we just have to buckle our seatbelts a little bit tighter to hold on for what's coming. But at the end of the day, all the work is about the local welcoming of new neighbors who are going to live alongside you, perhaps worship with you, perhaps their children will go to school with your children or grandchildren. So I'm really excited to conclude my comments here for now and hear from Jane and Mary, Ken, Brad, and Jackie about how they've been living into this ministry locally. But happy to set that larger context for the conversation. Thanks, Kendall.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. That's really helpful. And I'd love to move our discussion now to our other panelists to discuss how local congregations are responding to the evolving situation and that increase in opportunities that we're seeing to provide that support to newcomers. So I'd love if each of you could give us an update on your congregation's ministry and how things are going.
Well, I'll start by sharing my screen. So because I'd like the opportunity to introduce you all to the Ahmed family. And this picture is taken at the Eid al-Fitr celebration meal at the end of the month of Ramadan. And over here is the dad of the family. This is Aladdin. Next to him is his son, Ahmed. The girl in the background is their 12-year-old daughter, Layla. In front of her is their 8-year-old Rojit. And then mom on the other end is Javine. And I would say that our team has been working with the Ahmed family for about 5 months right now. They are wonderful people, and I feel so lucky to have had the chance to get to meet with them and work with them. The way our team is organized at St. Philip's is there's about 10 of us, and everybody has different responsibilities. Mine tends to be more in the background, doing research, handling logistics, interfacing with our business administrator at the church on financial affairs and things like that. But Brad and Jackie have been visiting with the family on a weekly basis for this entire time. And so I would love to pass this over to them and let them share a little bit about what it's been like to be with the Ahmed family. Brad and Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jackie.
In case there were any questions.
First of all, they are not Afghans. They're from Syria. They're Kurdish Syrians. So when we started this out, we thought we were getting an Afghan family, but the military people here in town really stepped up. And so I think a lot of the Afghan families were already taken care of. So we got a Syrian family. And they're kind of unusual that, well, maybe not unusual in their country, but the men speak Kurdish and they speak Arabic. The boy was educated, the girls are not. The girls only speak Kurdish, and one of the girls is a special needs girl. And that's the older girl. She's a special needs girl. So it's been challenging. They started off at a school that was very far from their home, and they had to get on a bus at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't get home till 6 o'clock at night. And so amongst we have people that are ex-teachers and
Retired doctor.
yeah, retired doctors. But anyway, the ex-teachers was able to navigate the school system to get them into a school that was closer. And so now they're home by 4, which is a lot better. I don't know what time they leave in the morning, but 4 o'clock is a lot better. Do you have some things to say?
Yeah, it's been interesting. This is the first time Jackie and I have ever done this, so we're this is on the job training for us. And I think the first thing I learned is to be flexible. Yeah, you start with a plan and then throw it out because, what the heck. But like Jackie said, originally the church was committed to helping Afghanistan refugees. And then we ended up, thank God, that with the Syrian refugees, they've been in a camp for 9 years. It was really life-changing for them and for the family to get here. I think the church really stepped up, working with our partner, the Lutheran Social Refugee Services here. I guess it's Lutheran Social Services. But they were able to locate in December. They located an apartment, and they were working in the background because we don't have any particular expertise in government bureaucrats. Yeah, Allison smiles. I worked for IBM, so I know bureaucracy when I see it. But so they were working the paperwork side of things, but, Jane took the lead. We had furniture. We'd had a whole bunch of people showed up to help round up the furniture, deliver the apartment, set up the beds, get the kitchen table, sofa, all the things that we all kind of take for granted.
Food.
Yeah, food too.
And it was halal food. It wasn't just any old food.
Yeah, so it was quite an outpouring of support to get them set up and going. But then
and then they didn't have any winter clothes.
Yeah, we had to buy those.
They had to go out and buy winter
We
clothes.
do have winters in Arizona. It's hard to believe, but it does get cold.
And they had no heat for a long time.
Yeah, there were all these little things that you just don't even think of, like Southwest Gas needed a signed lease, but they couldn't sign the lease. And, it's like, you just got to be flexible and persistent.
Yeah, we got him a lot of space heaters.
Yeah. But to Allison's point, I think you mentioned capacity. That's kind of what our experience was. Our local partner is that they were just swamped. They were completely swamped, and they, God bless them. We'd give them things to do, or they'd accept things to do, and they didn't happen. So we keep asking, and our savior, I think, in all of this was a woman who's a translator, Muna, spelled M-O-U-N-A. She says, "I'm not Mona, I'm Muna." Okay, so but she's been a lifeline because she can communicate effectively with the family. She gets on conference calls. She's been instrumental in trying to help with the children getting through the medical process, getting them aligned with the GP, getting the special needs daughter assessed, which is an ongoing saga. Yeah, it's been going on. And interfacing with the schools. Jackie's helped with some of the medical stuff, and of course having a retired doctor helps a lot. Anne
is retired. I'm blocking on Anne's last name.
Yeah.
But Anne's a retired doctor, so she's been going to a lot of the appointments too. It's very helpful.
And we learned some things that in the spirit of efficiency that the kids had to be vaccinated. You say, well, no big deal. Well, I don't know how it works in other states, but they did 8 vaccinations at once. That's same appointment.
And it ended up where Javine got so sick from it, she had to go to the emergency room. It's just. Yeah,
and I appreciate efficiency, but I think that's a little over the top. 8 vaccinations in one setting. I don't know if I'd live through it. They're young, but that's a lot. And the weird thing was, according to the translator, they were vaccinated before they entered the US, but we don't count those records.
Poor things.
For whatever the reason. So they could go through the jungle now, probably not have to worry about getting anything. But so it's been quite an experience. And like Jane said, we've tried to continue to interact with them and
as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's the biggest challenge is language. And if Moon is not there, we tried Google Translate.
We get by with it. We get by.
Sometimes it's a near miss, but we can muddle through. But I think for us, one of the things I was thinking about prepping for this meeting, somehow working with partners, because they're totally stretched.
LSS.
Yeah, it's critical to have people that can speak the language in the loop, and the poor translators work in I don't know how many hours a day, 16. She does translation for the courts and for
about 5 different families.
Yeah, so she's wiped out. And to do that, it says, well, you just get the internet. Well, they were supposed to get the internet in January, and we're still here in May, and they don't have it. So we've been fighting the bureaucracy. There's these low cost programs, but they require certain documentation. And if it doesn't have the exact documentation that's specified, then it doesn't go anywhere. And oh, by the way, they send you confirmation notes. They're writing in Arabic. The confirmation notes are in English, and they only check their email once a week because they don't know what they're getting. So our local provider's Cox. So they send them an acknowledgement with some more questions. Well, they can't answer them. Yes. So the internet has been a barrier to getting effective English education to them. And I think the kids are getting some in school because
the son is picking up a lot.
Yeah.
The older son.
Yeah. So he's but he's real shy. So you kind of have to say, do you get that? Yeah. He nods, yeah.
Well, Brad and Jackie, if I could jump in for a moment. First of all, thank you. And to be honest, what you were just describing, the difficulties, the struggles, and yet the love you all bring to that is, to me, inspiring. Because again, as you said, these are folks who have been in a camp for what, 9 years. I would love just to kind of reflect on a couple of things. One is thank you to you, and thank you to the people of the great place, St. Philip's in the Hills. Having been the canon to the ordinary of the Diocese of Arizona, I know your parish well, and I am not at all surprised that we had that kind of love shown in that place. And the beauty is there are a lot of other parishes out there, as we well know, in the Episcopal Church, who are already doing this work as well, like you all, or who want to find out how to do it. And as you've said, it's not easy. I want to make a couple of quick notes, though, to something you all, a couple of things you mentioned in passing. One is to take note that this 9-year time in the camps. I think very few folks realize people often confuse refugees, asylum seekers, and just that term immigrants, which can cover many, many different types of displaced persons. But it's helpful for all who are watching, and all of you watching may already know this, but the fact is that refugees, because they come in through the official system of our country, they are truly among the most vetted people in our country, far more so than perhaps I am. As a native-born American, these are persons who have gone through the ringer and have gone through every possible means of checking as they're coming in. In fact, the minimum is usually 2. And as you just said, we weren't talking 2 years here for these folks. And so even before they have gotten to us, they have endured much. And for them to find the welcome, the standing with them, even if all of it is imperfect at times, and even if it stretches all to the limits, I can think of very few things that are more about the love of God in Jesus that we proclaim and that we see. I also want to make note of one other thing for those who are watching. As you heard, Brad and Jackie were right about talking about the partnership factor and how much that is needed. There can be partnerships, and those partnerships go across Christian denominations and across faith groups. In fact, Episcopal Migration Ministries is one of 9 official agencies for the United States of America in welcoming and resettling refugees. Out of those 9, 6 are faith-based groups, 1 Jewish and 5 Christian, and 3 are what we might call non-religious or secular. These are the ways by which someone comes into this country, by which we find a stranger become a friend, a neighbor, and in which we can show ways to be a neighbor to them, as I believe Allison will talk about later on. But again, I just want to underscore the fact that this is, as you said, incredibly hard work. It is work that demands partnerships, which is one of the things we in the Church Engagement Unit of Episcopal Migration Ministries always wanted to see. How could we help support that and figure out how to make that, increase those partnerships? And it takes a whole lot of love, like what is being shown by the people, the good folks at St. Philip's in the Hills, and many, many other Episcopal congregations throughout. So thank you both for that. And I know we're going to be eager to have some conversation with some of our folks off panel, but I just wanted to say thank you from my standpoint. Kendall.
Thank you so much for that, Canon Chuck. And I'd love to hear from Mary Kent Hill and your experience in your congregation's ministry.
Thank you, Kendall. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and our church is co-sponsoring the Stanek family who arrived October 15th. It's hard to believe it's been that long. They were at a military base in Virginia for about 6 weeks before coming to our community. They are wonderful. There's a husband, wife, and then 3 adorable boys who are 6, 5, and almost 3. And I can relate to the challenges that you all described as well. There's so many hurdles, particularly with bureaucracy in terms of getting access to things such as medical care or all the documents that they did not have when they arrived. So we're still working on things. It's also been a wonderful opportunity to meet others in our community from, as you mentioned, Chuck, other faith communities. A church near us had a space in their preschool and offered a scholarship to the 5-year-old, and it's been wonderful. He's been there since January and will graduate in a few weeks to be ready to go to kindergarten. The oldest son is about to complete kindergarten in the public school, and they've offered wonderful services as well. We've connected with other groups who are also co-sponsoring families, like the Judeo Reform Congregation is sponsoring, I think, 3 families, and one of theirs has 2 Afghans who were professionals and both speak very good English, and they have been helping us with translation efforts. We have a core group of about 10 people, and then many others who are available on as needed basis, like transportation has been a big issue with all the different medical appointments. The father does have a great job with a landscaping company, and someone donated a bike to him. He's able to bike to and from work. So that's great. And he was so excited he passed getting his learner's permit. And he really wants to get his driver's license, and another family is willing to donate a car for him. So we're getting close to that. But last week, our team, the Stanek Zai family, did invite us over for their Eid celebration. And it was so joyous, and I felt so honored to be there. And they, I guess in their tradition, they serve everything on the floor. So they covered the whole floor with a big cloth, and all the platters heaping with food were there. And we had a lot of fun and talking about their traditions and kind of their impressions of how things have been going. And then they sent all of us with huge take-home platters for our families. So it was a joyous occasion. But it is hard work, but I've been so grateful for getting to meet this family and for getting connections within our community of people who are so loving.
Thank you so much. And I think everyone has hit on the, with anything that is hard work, there are going to be challenges, but I'd love for each of you to highlight what has been the most rewarding, or where you found joy or hope in this experience, because I do think there's a place in this ministry for everyone who wants to be involved. It takes all of us together. So I'd love if you could highlight that for us.
Oh, for us, yeah. Well, we actually, we just enjoy visiting with the family. Anytime you go over there, they want to serve you food. They bring out food, and they bring out coffee or tea or whatever. And then we don't always have Muna there to translate, so we use the translator, and we're doing a lot of laughing, because sometimes what you say and then you show them, they're like, and then they'll write back, "I'm pregnant." No.
Sometimes a translation.
It's a translation is kind of funny. And then one time, I mean, they don't have much money, but he went out, the father went out. We were going to meet with him to take him to work on this internet thing. And he wasn't there. And we were like, well, where did he go? Oh, he'll be right back. Well, he had run down to McDonald's, and he bought all this McDonald's food for us. And, and hamburgers and French fries, and I'm eating my hamburger, and I look at him and I said, "McDonald's, hello?" And the boy is picking up, he knows a lot more English. But he just says, "We just don't eat pig."
Yeah, it's been rewarding just interfacing with the family and helping them deal with all of the challenges. I can't even imagine showing up in a country where you don't speak the language, initially they had no transportation, you know, and trying to find a life for your family. It's just beyond me. So it's really been, that's the most rewarding part, is kind of just working with the family and helping them do what, you know, we say, well, that shouldn't be a big deal, but if you don't have a driver's license and
You don't have a car.
you don't have a car, bus service in Tucson is not terrible, but you have to know English to be able to navigate. You know, it's just been helpful to, you know, it's been great to be of help to them and help them overcome some of these.
And also, I'm just very happy that the girls are getting educated now. Because they were not allowed to be educated, I guess.
Yeah, so that it's been, the other thing that we discovered, besides McDonald's being okay, was they love chips.
Doritos.
They're when they were first settled, they had bags of Doritos all over. I think their food allowance was going to Doritos and Oreos. Those were the two. So now when we go over, we bring Oreos.
We always bring them some Oreos. But it's been amusing a lot of times. That's what the best part I get out of it is just how happy they are to see us.
My background has been working with children, and so that's been one of the joys for me. And you know, just going to a park and seeing the boys run around, and they're just so happy, and that makes their mother happy. And that's she says if they're happy, she's happy. And now the 6-year-old is really learning so much English, and so he's often telling us what his parents are saying. It's amazing how quickly the children pick up English.
Kendall, I'm fascinated with some of the questions and deeply grateful to you, Jane, who you've been typing away, responding to the question from Lisa, it looks like, on the about the place to live. And I'm curious to be able to hear more about that, about the practicalities of that. So Kendall, I don't know who best would be able to address that. I don't know if Allison has some thoughts on that, or else, or others, but I think that these are some good, realistic, practical questions. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for Allison to chime in and give the perspective from the national level.
Sure, I can do that. So for anyone on the call who is currently sponsoring or looking to sponsor, in terms of housing, one of the things I would ask or would want you to consider is which organization are you partnering with for the sponsorship? Are you doing this through a local resettlement affiliate of a national agency? Because then they should be your go-to for some guidance on what their best practices are around housing. Most affiliates will have staff who develop relationships with landlords and property managers, and they will have some kind of well-hewn paths that they follow for finding appropriate housing. So that's one thing. It depends on who you're working with. If you're working through some of the more private resettlement pathways, the one I mentioned that currently exists is the Sponsor Circle program for Afghans. I also mentioned the Biden administration's newly announced Uniting for Ukraine pathway, which is different, but similar in that it's privately funded and operated once the government approves you. A lot of the work of finding landlords and property managers who are interested in being part of this work and willing to work with a newcomer family who doesn't have a credit history will fall on the private sponsor. So that's kind of a non-answer answer in a way. It does depend on with which organization are you partnering with, in which pathway are you working as a sponsor. And then there should be organizations in any of those streams who can provide some good best practice guidance. But at the end of the day, if you're doing one of the more private sponsorship models, the work of developing those relationships with landlords or property managers would fall to the private sponsor. And co-signing on the lease could also fall to that private sponsor as well.
Thanks, Allison. And a follow-up question to that is someone had asked about resources for vestries or church leadership. who want to start the discussion about the sponsorship of a family?
Sure. So I'd like to take the opportunity to invite everyone who's listening to learn about EMM's Neighbor to Neighbor program. I mentioned it briefly earlier because that's where we have housed our Sponsor Circle program for Afghans functions. But Neighbor to Neighbor has another part of it program, which is training community groups to sponsor asylum seekers. These are individuals who have fled their homelands because of fear of persecution, but the United Nations or a country hasn't yet granted them refugee status. So these are individuals who are asking for refugee status from the United States, and they need a lot of support because they have no eligibility for any government support or resettlement agency support until they are granted asylum. So I would love for you all to find out more about Neighbor to Neighbor on the webpage. I'll post the link in the chat in a moment. We lay out the phases of the program as a sponsor group would experience them. So you can kind of see how it goes from discernment to training, readiness assessment, matching and sponsorship, and conclusion. We offer weekly information sessions at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays. So there's one tonight. Those are weekly. So we continue to offer these to educate and inform vestries, outreach committees, et cetera, on the program. So I'll pop the link in the chat, or Kendall just did. Thank you, Kendall. We'd love to talk with you all. In my earlier context setting at the beginning of the panel discussion, I mentioned how there are more and more opportunities for community groups to be involved directly in resettlement. And that's what I was pointing to, was Neighbor to Neighbor has become our vehicle for that. And the Biden administration has announced a new private sponsorship program for refugees. And we are internally working through, what does that mean for EMM? How does that apply to Neighbor? So we're in the midst of rapid, vast sea change in resettlement. Like I said, we buckle our seatbelts every day to see what else is changing. But Neighbor to Neighbor is EMM's most direct pathway by which you can work directly with EMM virtually anywhere in the country. So we would love to meet you, to talk with you, to have you attend an information session.
Thank you, Allison. And I'd love for everyone on the panel to discuss just the different ways that individuals can be involved. So whether it's as a member of the ministry team, fulfilling a specific role, or if there are others in your congregation who are supporting in other ways, because one of the things we say is that everybody has gifts and skills that they bring to the table for this ministry. And so we want to lift up that there are so many different ways to be involved, and they're all really important.
I do think that it's very important to involve the congregation as a whole and not just the core team. And so before we made a commitment to take a family, we did some research in our congregation. First, there was a sort of like a soft survey where people could just indicate their interest. Once we realized that we thought we had a critical mass of people who were willing to put time into this, then we did a fundraiser, and we collected a fair amount of money, which turned out to be really helpful because there were expenses we had not foreseen. For instance, we were expected to buy new mattresses for the family, which cost several $1,000s. And so it was great that we had this kitty to go to. And there have been a couple of other things along the way. Before they got a car, we got some Uber passes. There's now an issue where they'd like to try and get out of the LSS sponsored housing and have their own apartment, but there are some hurdles there that are going to require some money. So that was like the next step. And then once the family arrives, we have kept everybody at church informed by regular postings in our news bulletin. Dad got a job. Oh, the family now has a car. We could really use prayers for, for instance, the daughter who needs to get in to see specialists, and that's been really challenging. And so you can ask people to pray, you can ask people to give money, you can ask people, there are plenty of people who could volunteer a day, but not an ongoing several month process. So we had a huge team to set up the apartment the day before the family moved in. So there are lots of different ways to do that.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, there's little things that you don't even think of, but people, to Jane's point, that could be occasionally involved. They donated bicycles because they heard the kids didn't have any transportation. They're kind of stuck in this apartment. The bicycle helmets were the next order of business. So we had people donate bicycle helmets. So there's been lots of little things like that that just sort of come up, and the congregation will step up and somebody donates kind of just random stuff that you find out you need.
And we donated television.
Yeah.
Because they're actually, I think, picking up some English from the television too.
Yeah.
Mary, does all this sound familiar? Is this sound like things happening in your neck of the woods?
Oh, yes. Initially, before we knew when the Stanek Side family would arrive, we had so many people who signed up to bring certain items to furnish the apartment. And so we had like 24 hours notice, knowing that they were going to arrive. And within 2 weeks, we had found an apartment for them. And so everyone had their things, it was ready to go. And then along the way, people have helped, sporadically with transportation, or we have some people who are doing volunteer tutoring with the kids as well as the parents. So there are many, many opportunities to do kind of as much or as little as you might be able to.
Kendall. Oh, there you're back. You had frozen, Kendall. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I know that the situation in terms of the cash that's needed differs based on the way that folks are entering into this ministry. So I'd love to start, Allison, if you could speak from the EMM programming that we have and sort of how that's laid out, just to give people context for generally what's expected.
Sure. So what we have within Neighbor to Neighbor is a model where we're trying to mirror to the fullest extent possible the type of support, including the financial support that someone would receive through the formal resettlement program. We're trying to replicate that in the private model, the Neighbor to Neighbor model. So we borrowed a lot of learning from the Sponsor Circle program for Afghans, which was set up to mirror what Afghans would receive if they came through a resettlement agency. And then we applied that across the Neighbor to Neighbor model to include asylum seekers, because we would not want to provide less support to one population than another. We want to try to achieve parity across our programming and provide the highest quality and best support that we can to the sponsor team, so they in turn can provide the highest quality and best support to their new neighbors. So within the Neighbor to Neighbor program, the amount of money that we ask sponsors to raise per individual that they're sponsoring is $2,275 per person. And again, the reason for that is because it mirrors the federal supports. That is a one-time federal support to a person. And for a resettlement agency, usually part of that money is for administrative costs for staff. And then there's a smaller portion that is direct cash assistance to the family. So in the private model, all that money is direct cash assistance for rent, for basic needs, for clothing, food, et cetera. So we applied that across the program. The amount of money necessary to sponsor with an affiliate differs from affiliate to affiliate, even across the EMM network. We do not have a heavy hand in micromanaging how our affiliates run their own co-sponsorship programs. Now, Mary Kent, I think you're working through a CWS affiliate.
We did, but they ended their service after 90 days.
Right.
So it's, we have done a lot more than we were anticipating.
And do you have, from the affiliate that you worked with in North Carolina, did they give you an amount of money that they request a co-sponsor to raise? What was that amount? I
believe 4,000.
Yeah, and Jane placed in the chat that you've done about 4,500 to date. And the models that both Mary Kent and Jane's parishes have engaged in has been co-sponsorship alongside a local affiliate. So the newcomers are still receiving services from the affiliate, but they're usually time limited, as Mary Kent said. They're limited to a certain number of days per the federal program. So I'll stop there just to say that the amount of money necessary differs from program to program. And a lot more money is needed to be raised if you're doing a private model than if you're working with an affiliate.
And a question has come in for our panelist is, what would you do differently if you had a chance to do it all over again? Would anyone like to speak to that question?
You know, in retrospect, I think we needed more time up front to negotiate with Lutheran Social Services what the respective responsibilities were going to be. They have a manual for co-sponsors, which we read, and then it really didn't play out like it was in the written document. And so if we had had the opportunity to sit down, especially with the caseworker, there was a big disconnect between the level of communication we expected from the caseworker and the level of communication she thought was sufficient. And so I think if we'd had a chance to talk through expectations up front, I mean, maybe if we'd known that she was only going to be able to check in with us maybe once a month, we wouldn't have been so surprised when things just went silent. So that's, I think, probably discussing expectations up front. I would have done differently. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, really, that anyone on our team has ever done anything like this, and we've learned a lot.
Yeah, I mirror that comment. I made a list of things, and I thought, yeah, it's challenging when you're dealing with an affiliate that is themselves totally swamped. So they're trying to get their nose above the waterline so they can breathe, right? We're coming in with, well, how do you do this? Or we need to do that, or here's what has to happen. I think a conversation up front about, here's how long this thing lasts. Here's what we're going to do until that date. Here's what you need to be prepared to do after that date, which, you know, somebody that can't speak the language, 3 months is not, just not.
It's not adequate.
It's not adequate. I was thinking realistically, based on what I'd seen, a year maybe of support is probably what's really required to get somebody up, conversant with English, able to hold a job, knows how to get around town, you know, all the basic stuff. And I understand there's budget constraints for everybody, but, you know, just you said, well, in a perfect world, how much time would you have? I'd say, yeah, probably a year. The other thing, and it's probably because it's nagged us so much, is if we had any idea how hard the internet was going to be,
To get them,
we would have been on that a lot sooner. It was just like, it's been like the perils of Pauline. It's like, oh, one more thing, you know, it's like, and it's not rocket science. It's just, you have to do it in a certain way with certain forms on certain, you know, it's just like,
and I don't think the family really understood everything they had to do. So we had to sort of just, once it got to be over 3 months.
Then sit down with the translator and go through the forms and figure this thing out. We went to the school, we had to get a form from the school, and we just took them around and said, we're going to get it done today, and turned out.
Yeah, we took them with us so that they knew we weren't just walking in there asking for this information.
Yeah, so, but yeah, but you know, the internet's so essential now. If you're trying to learn English, you can do it so easily if you've got internet, but if you don't have internet, you know.
So this goes back to one of the earlier questions about getting people in your church involved. We couldn't figure out why we were hitting the wall on this. And so there's a gal who sings in our choir who actually works for the vice president at Cox, which is the IP provider. And she went and talked to the sales manager and found out what the snag was, so that we would have some chance of trying to help them. It's because the SNAP form, which was submitted, was the emergency letter rather than one stating ongoing benefits, and that's why they were dinged. They were, you know, disqualified. But I don't know how we would have ever known that. And, you know, there is somebody assigned to do this work at the agency, at the Lutheran Social Services, but he's trying to do this for so many families that stuff's just fallen through the cracks.
I noticed that that some people need to drop off because of the time. As we're coming to the time, I just saw Joe Swimmer's comments. I'm so grateful for Joe and for the Episcopal Parish Network for this. But Kendall, I was just wanting to comment, as folks have further questions, especially some of the things that Allison talked about earlier, there's probably many questions that are not going to be answered here. So before we leave, I just wanted to say that if you all could make sure and take a look at, go online to episcopalchurch.org. As you go to the homepage, if you go just down a little bit, you'll find a lot of information. I'm assuming this is showing and that I'm not the only one looking at this right now. You'll see a lot of information about the neighbor to neighbor and how to get more information about and for that program. And then if you go a little further down on that same homepage, you'll come to what says Ministries beyond the Episcopal Church. And here you can get more information about Episcopal Migration Ministries in general, and also about other parts of our area, including the Office of Government Relations. Again, we haven't spoken much about this right now, but so much of the work we're doing that you all are doing on the ground is supported by our advocacy on the Hill. And so our colleagues in the Office of Government Relations in Washington, D.C. are helping to support this, as are our offices of ecumenical and interreligious relations and our global partnerships office. All of this is there on the homepage of episcopalchurch.org, and especially here, the Neighbor to Neighbor program. I just wanted to make sure I drew attention to that. I didn't know if Mary had anything else to add on her end, Kendall, but I just wanted to make sure before people dropped off, they heard some of the resources.
Yeah, well, very similar to what you all mentioned, Jane. We were one of the first organizations to have a family come in, and Church World Service was still trying to figure out the plan. There was no manual. There was nothing. As our rector said, we were trying to build the plane as we were flying, and our team was still being formed. So everything was just happening so quickly without much guidance at the beginning. So it has been a challenge.
Thank you so much. And I just real quickly, I wanted to ask Allison, because there's been a couple of questions that I think would be really helpful for folks to understand, especially as they're navigating what their role might be in this work. But sort of for folks to understand the difference between private sponsorship, co-sponsorship, community sponsorship, and then how Neighbor to Neighbor has weaved best practices of those programs into the way that it's administered.
Sure. And for friends to know, Kendall and her team are working on infographics that help describe this, pictorially. So I will do my very best, but always defer to Kendall and her team on making it even more accessible. So community sponsorship is an umbrella term that means when a community group agrees to provide a defined amount of support to a newcomer family. And the newcomer family is usually forcibly displaced. So they're refugees, humanitarian parolees, asylum seekers, et cetera. So that's the umbrella term. And that's what we've been talking about today. Groups of neighbors coming together to commit to providing certain supports to a family for a limited period of time. Where the definitions kind of become different is with which organization are you partnering to do that community sponsorship? If you are working directly through an affiliate of a national resettlement agency, so the affiliate that Mary Kent's working with in North Carolina is an affiliate of another national agency. There is a program defined by the U.S. Department of State called co-sponsorship. And that's when a sponsor group commits to a certain threshold of supports. So that's kind of the State Department definition. It's through an affiliate. EMM's local affiliates, we have 11. Next year we'll have more. We're working on our federal proposals right now. So hold us in prayer. But if you were to do that in partnership with one of our affiliates and meet that threshold of commitment, you would be considered a co-sponsor as well. So that's through the affiliates. The other types of community sponsorship include Sponsor Circle Program for Afghans, which I've spoken about EMM has housed that within our Neighbor to Neighbor program. So I'm really grateful to Ken and Chuck for showing that screen share. We talked about Neighbor to Neighbor several times in this conversation, so I do hope you all will check it out. Sponsor Circles is privately funded and driven by local community members. So you have to do all the fundraising, you have to write up your whole welcome plan, you're doing all the supports and services. There is no professional case manager. It is you doing all the work. EMM has staff. We have a program manager, a program officer for training and sponsor support who walk alongside you and provide you ongoing technical assistance, training, troubleshooting throughout the whole process. So that's the Sponsor Circle program and Neighbor to Neighbor. Then the other new type of private sponsorship that will become real later this summer is what the Biden administration has announced. They've announced a call for proposals for concept notes for private sponsorship of refugees. That is different from the other two types I just mentioned, but they all fall under that larger community sponsorship umbrella, which at the end of the day is groups of neighbors coming together to commit to providing certain supports to their new neighbors upon their arrival, their new neighbors being forcibly displaced people. So Kendall, I hope that did it justice, and I can't wait for your infographic.
That did, but I am going to throw one more at you, which is just for folks who are wondering, when are they going to hear stuff about Uniting for Ukraine? If you could give just a brief overview of where that stands.
Sure. So Uniting for Ukraine was announced by the Biden administration a few weeks ago, and currently you can find information on the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services website. That's USCIS, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. To be part of Uniting for Ukraine, thanks so much, Kendall. Kendall just popped the link in the chat. You first have to go through the US government's process to apply to be a sponsor. So that webpage that Kendall posted gives you all the information. It starts with you getting approved by the US government to sponsor Ukrainians through Uniting for Ukraine. There are organizations, EMM being amongst them, who are in conversation together about how we provide ongoing support to those sponsors. Because the US government is not going to be the people you call when you're facing a crisis and you don't know how to manage it. It's going to be organizations that are standing up to support sponsors. So EMM is in conversation, as I said, about that. The most likely program that we would map that into would be Neighbor to Neighbor. So that's why I really encourage you all, if you're at all interested and just want to gather more information for your vestry, your outreach committee, et cetera, come to our Neighbor to Neighbor information sessions, because we will explain to you what it means to be a sponsor and all the practicalities after you apply through the US government to sponsor Ukrainian through Uniting for Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Allison. And that's all I see for questions at the moment, but does anyone have any last thoughts they would like to leave our participants with?
As I run off to another meeting about another part of the world, I'm just so grateful for the work of folks like you all, Jane, Mary, Brad, Jackie, and so many others like you. And there's a lot of folks who are saying, well, maybe we can join the team and be a part of some of this work. And that is my hope and prayer as we move forward. And deeply grateful for the ongoing work of Episcopal Migration Ministries for 40 years working in refugee resettlement, and under other names for 80 plus years. It has been the Episcopal Church's commitment to be there for displaced persons. And so I'm just so grateful. And I know that the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Michael Curry, continues to give great thanks for this tangible way of seeing the love of Jesus in action. So I'm just deeply grateful, and thank you all who participated in this, and all of you who took the time to watch.